take a moment to address what's happening in the country right now. I think it's heartbreaking, but at the same time, it would be ridiculous not to do anything about it. So I just want to say, if you're part of an underrepresented group and there's anything I can do to help you, feel free to reach out anytime after this talk and reach out to me on social media. If there's anyone I can connect you with or help you with speaking or negotiation or anything like that, feel free to do that. All right, I'm going to go ahead and get started. Sharing my screen. Sierra, let me know if you do not see my screen. Is everything good? Okay. All right. Every Android project written in Java is now a legacy project. Take a moment to really think about this. If you're still writing in Java code and it's not for a legitimate reason, then you're probably going to stay a legacy project. For most people in our industry, moving to Kotlin happened either by love or by force. But no matter the reason, overall developer happiness has just shot up. In the past few years, I have not met a single developer that hasn't said, I love writing Kotlin. How many of you already write Kotlin? If you already write in Kotlin, I want you to ask yourselves, am I writing Kotlin in a way that fully utilizes its features? Or have I just substituted Java syntax for Kotlin syntax? If you're wondering whether or not you're writing idiomatic Kotlin code, making conversions efficiently, or you're just lost on how to take your large legacy code base and slowly start moving it towards Kotlin, then this talk is for you. Hello, my name is Seetha Annamraju, and today I want to share some of the most common patterns that show up in legacy code in Java and how you can quickly and easily modify those into Kotlin so you can create a more concise, safe, and readable code base. So today, first I'm going to talk about how to think about Java to Kotlin conversions and what it really means to use idiomatic Kotlin. Next, we'll cover some common patterns that often show up and how to convert those into idiomatic Kotlin. Most of the examples I'm going to use today are loosely based off of real code that I've seen in production in mixed code bases. And last, I'm going to share my tips and suggestions for you moving forward. All right. For assumptions for this talk, I'm assuming that you're an Android engineer with basic Kotlin syntax experience and that you believe code should be left better than you found it. Okay, let's get started. For the purpose of this talk, I'm going to define a legacy codebase as any codebase that started off as a Java project or still contains a substantial amount of Java code. Once you decide that you want to take the next step and convert your Java code to Kotlin, the very first step is to actually take a step back and take a look at your project. Ask yourself these questions. First, how much time do I have? Second, what are the priority items? Where is the biggest need? And third, are there any components that need fixes or updates anyway? This might be a good place to start doing your Kotlin conversions, as long as you do it step by step and make sure that your entire team is on the same page with you. Once you decide what you want to work on, the next step is to actually start converting. Step 2 is to start converting your Java code into Kotlin. And for this, you have two main options. Option number 1 is to rewrite the entire file in Kotlin from scratch. And you would do this by focusing on core pieces of logic. And this works well if you have large files or files that have many dependencies outside of it. Option number 2 would be to pull off the band-aid, so to speak. And this is where you would go to the file, select the code, go to code, convert Java file to Kotlin file, and then you end up with an entire file that is in Kotlin, but has compiler errors. So the very first thing to do is to fix all of these compiler errors and just make sure that your code is running. Step 2 would be to fix all of the warnings and suggestions that the IDE is giving you, or these are the gray squiggly lines that show up in your Android Studio IDE. And as you can see, you're slowly starting to move towards better and better Kotlin code. The very last step, step 3, would be to add in the idiomatic Kotlin. So you would go through the code one last time and see where you can find patterns that you can convert into better Kotlin. Now, I keep saying idiomatic Kotlin a lot, so let's talk about it. Step 3 is to ensure idiomatic code. And by idiomatic Kotlin, the things I like to refer to are 1, null safety, 2, immutability, 3, being expressive and concise, and 4, easy interoperability with Java. Now, these are by no means the only idioms in Kotlin, but they are the ones that show up for very common patterns in Java, and they're the ones we will be focusing on today. So let's dive into these. Null safety. Null safety is super important because when you're working in Java, you probably run into a lot of null pointer exceptions. And some of these may have even caused your apps to crash unexpectedly. Kotlin provides a way for you to write safe code and avoid those null pointer exceptions. So it's really important that we take advantage of this. And for this, we have two main options. The first is a safe call operator, or the question mark. And the second is the non-null assertion operator, or double bang, or 2 exclamation marks. The safe call operator says, maybe this variable is null. And the double bang says, this variable is definitely not null. So when you do a Java to Kotlin file conversion, you usually end up with code that looks kind of like this. Please don't try to read this. I just want to point out all of the double bangs that show up in your code. And it does this because it says, I don't know whether or not this can be null, so I'm just going to go ahead and say it's null. But we want to get rid of these. And the reason we want to get rid of these is because they offer no protection against null. You're basically yelling at the compiler and saying, this variable will never be null, I'm so sure of it. But when it is null and you're wrong, then you've created places in your code where your app can crash unexpectedly. So how do you get rid of these? The basic thinking here is to go through each one and ask yourself, can this ever be null? If it can never be null, then declare it non-nullable to begin with. And if it can be null, then just make sure you handle it in all the places where it can be null. Another option you can use is the safe call operator. And this is great because it basically says, execute this if and only if the variable is not null. So in this case, let's say I have a media player question mark dot stop. I'm saying stop if media player is not null. The Elvis operator is an often underused operator, but it can be really valuable if you have default values or default paths. So it takes 2 arguments and it returns the first argument if it's not null. Otherwise, it returns the second argument. So in this case, I'm saying if name.toString is not null, return it. Otherwise, return unknown and assign it back to the valid result. You can also consider using a late init var. Late init var literally stands for a late initialization of a variable, and it does just that. Whenever you have a variable that you know will get initialized before it gets used, but just not right away, you can use a late init var. And this is most often used for dependency injection. But note that late init var is by definition a variable and therefore mutable. So it offers less predictability in code. Which brings me to my next point. Item number 2, immutability. Immutability basically says, when I define a variable, I can be rest assured that it won't change by the time I use it. And you can do this by using things like bylazy in Kotlin. And the reason this is important is because it offers more predictability in code. So you can consider using bylazy. Let's say in Java, you've defined something, a media loader object, and you need to initialize it at some point. And the only way you can do that is by passing in context. How you can do this is by passing it directly into the bylazy block in Kotlin. And so media loader would get initialized when context does become available. Whenever possible, try to use bylazy over late init var because by definition, it is a val and it's immutable. So it offers more predictability in your code. You can also consider doing a local capture of values. Let's say you have a variable called media player, which must be declared nullable for whatever reason. So whenever you do a Java to Kotlin file conversion, excuse me, it basically says, I'm going to throw in these double bangs wherever you use media player because it's a mutable object and I don't know if it's null or not at this point. So we want to get rid of these. And one way we can do this is by doing a local capture of the values that you're using. So you say val player equals media player or val renderer equals scene renderer. And by doing one null check, you can go ahead and use it. So by doing this one null check, you've taken something that is potentially mutable and nullable and converted it into something that is non-nullable and immutable, at least within the scope. And your code is also much cleaner. You've probably started to see how you can say more with less when it comes to writing Kotlin. But let's look at a few more examples to really drive the point home. It's about being more concise and expressive, especially by using Kotlin standard library. Why is this even important? Well, over 70% of your time is spent reading code rather than writing code. Now, I don't actually remember who said this. Maybe I'm saying it. But if you really think about it, you know it's true, especially when you're doing code reviews or you're new on the team or just learning something new. So the easier it is for you to read something and understand it, the more efficient you will be as an engineer. So how can you achieve this? Let's look at a Java if statement. This is a surprisingly common Java if construction where you drill down into something deeper and deeper until something very specific is not null, and then you do something about it. Once you start writing Kotlin code, you realize how crazy this is. And the reason this is crazy is because each line is basically repeating the same exact null check. Some Java developers will throw this inside of a try catch and just kind of forget about it. And this is okay, but by nature, it is quite hacky because you're not actually doing anything with the catch. So what's a better way to do this in Kotlin? You can consider using Kotlin's let. Let basically says, do everything inside of the let block if everything to the left of me is not null. And whenever you find yourself looking at extremely verbose and repetitive code like this in Java, there's probably a standard library function in Kotlin that can help you do it better, such as Kotlin's let. Apply is really great when you want to do a configuration of an object, or you want to initialize an object and it's usually followed by a null check. You can do something like this. For example, you are initializing a media player object, and inside of the apply, you're just calling some methods on it. So you didn't need to do an extra null check. With is very similar to apply, but the way I like to think of with is with some object, do something else. So in this case, I'm saying with a syllabus object, return a course object. Pretty simple, right? Whenever you find yourself looking through a bunch of for loops in Java trying to transform a collection, you can consider using Kotlin's maps and filters. Let's say we have a list of student items and we want to convert that into a list of student view items for the UI. And let's say we also want to filter it by major. How you would do this in Kotlin is take the list of students, create an association between the major and the student view item that you've just created, go ahead and do a filter for computer science, and then map it all back into a list of student view items. See how clean this is. Imagine doing this in Java. What's really great about this, though, is that in Java, you would have mutated data inside of a collection, whereas here, you're taking an immutable data collection and creating a brand new immutable data collection. So again, you've preserved immutability and created more predictability in your code. We've talked a lot about how you can change your Java code and create more efficient Kotlin, but how do we make sure that all of these things don't affect the Java side of your application? One easy way is to talk about interop. So item number 4 is about easy interoperability with Java. And one of the biggest problems that comes up is nullable fields. We want to make sure that whenever we have a field coming back from the Java side, we annotate it with something like @nonnull or @nullable. Let me tell you why this is important. The Android SDK currently is littered with fields that are not annotated. And when we use it on the Kotlin side, this sometimes causes our apps to crash unexpectedly. That's being fixed. But meanwhile, a good rule of thumb is whenever you have something coming back from the Java side, Ask yourself, are you sure? Are you really sure that this variable can never be null? One of the best advertisements for Kotlin, as you've probably seen, is converting your Java object from something that looks kind of like this into a data class. And this is just a beautiful data class that does exactly the same thing and is easy to use on your Java side. But it also forces you to really think about nullability, like can first name be null? And it creates an easier way for you to create concise code and make it readable. You can also do extensions for any utility classes that you have. Let's say you had a Java class called extra_string_utils, which contains the static method on string called toOppositeCase, which takes a string, converts the lowercase letters to uppercase, and vice versa. What you can do is create an extension function on string. And in fact, you can create an entire file called stringext.kt, where all of your string extension functions can go. And then you just define the function there. And if you want to use this on the Java side, you just need to annotate your file with @file::JVM name and the name of the original class. And let's say you have multiple functions in this class, then just annotate this file with @JVM multifile class. We talked a lot about idiomatic Kotlin and going from Java to Kotlin, but what are some common questions that come up in this process? The very first question is, how do I do a large refactoring into Kotlin? So some tips I have for you are focus on what you know. It's a lot easier for you to refactor code that you are very familiar with than tackling something that you worked on 2 years ago, for example. Make sure that you write all new code in Kotlin so you're not kind of going backwards. And a good rule of thumb is to refactor anything you touch, especially if it doesn't have a lot of dependencies. And most importantly, make sure you use strategic commits like we talked about, making sure that your first commit is to just do the conversion. Second commit is to fix all the compiler errors. Third commit is to fix all the warnings. And the last commit is to make sure you apply any idiomatic changes into your code. So how do I ensure idiomatic code? Well, the best way is to do this through code reviews and learning and growing from each other on the team. Kotlinlang.org also provides a list of idioms that you can refer to get started. So what's next? Well, we've only touched the surface of what it means to use idiomatic Kotlin. You can also consider using lambdas for code simplification, or represent states using seal classes, or explore the many standard library functions that are out there. Here's what I would like to leave you with. Whenever you take on a project of refactoring, take a step back and really look at your project and figure out what you want to focus on and how much time you really have. Look for areas to apply things like null safety, immutability, readability, and better interop with Java. And most importantly, keep your team on the same page. It's most important to keep a consistent and happy code base and happy team than to move to Kotlin on day one. So what type of challenges do you face in your code bases and in converting your Java to Kotlin? I would love to hear from you. Thank you.
I think we're going to start the Q&A now. So if you guys just want to start putting your questions in the chat for Seetha, and she can start answering them. Thank you so much for that. That was great. I didn't have that extension function class, and so I'm going to change some code later.
And if you all have any questions afterwards, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn or any social media, and I'm happy to answer anything.
What is your favorite thing about Kotlin that Java doesn't have?
Definitely the null safety. I think we used to have a lot of just like things being set to nulls all the time, but now we're really conscious about, is the data coming back from the server supposed to be null? And then going back to backend team and being like, this ID should never be null. And so it's helping to create more conversations about how we handle data. So I think that was really,
I think Carmen had a question for you in the chat.
Have you heard of anyone converting super legacy Java Swing applications to Kotlin? I have not heard of Swing applications being converted to Kotlin, but there's so much, there's so many cool things about Kotlin right now, and overall, the developer happiness has just kind of like gone crazy, and there do surveys about this as well. And people are starting to adopt like Kotlin for multi-platform, and they're trying to even get rid of Swift to just like use Kotlin for everything. I've worked on a few teams that are trying to do that, so I'm sure that could be that could work too. Yeah, I actually love the notes. Yeah, I really like let too.
Did your team pick it up as soon as Google announced it?
I think it was it was like I was in the crowd when they announced it at Google I/O, and I was like, oh crap, I have to learn Kotlin now. But we started learning it right after, and it was at my previous company, and I worked on a project that that was completely in Kotlin using the best practices, and that's how I got to that point. And then we did like a workshop and got everyone else on board, and it's been kind of a journey from there. What would you suggest for beginners starting Android dev with Kotlin? So there are several resources. What's great is that Kotlin actually has so many resources out right now. I know that Google provides a Kotlin for Android developers course and then an intermediate one. I can try to find the link for you, Sneha, and provide that for you, but there's several courses on that. There's also many courses on Udemy that are pretty affordable as well. But it's a great way to just start with Kotlin. You don't have to start with Java, but understanding the underlying system is also important if you're not familiar with Java.
I see this a lot on Reddit, is people debating whether they should tell intro devs to do Kotlin or Java to learn Android. Do you have an opinion on that?
I think languages should be looked at as tools rather than the end game. So I always look at languages as a tool to get a job done. And so as long as you understand strong software principles like separation of concerns, writing clean code, and understand dependency management, things like that, I don't think it really matters what language you choose. I mean, Java might be outdated in like a few years. Kotlin might go away and something else comes up. So focus on the fundamentals is what I would say. What resources do you recommend to dive deeper into Kotlin? I'm currently going through Kotlin programming, the beginner wrench guide. There's a great course on LinkedIn Learning by Anise Davis for intermediate Kotlin, and I would definitely look at that. And also Google's, I completely forgot what the course is called, but Google offers an entire certification and training program for Kotlin for Android devs, and that one's really good too. Yeah, no problem. Yes, I will find the links and provide them for you. Sierra, what's a good way to get those two attendees?
If they, let me get a link to post to join the mobile Slack channel for Women Who Code, and then yeah, Madonna just post it, and then you can send them to me, and I can put them to everyone. We have a Kotlin channel, so just give me a second to post that.
Cool.
Getting the link.
How does one get into Women Who Code Slack? Sure. Feel free to add me on LinkedIn now. I'll put my LinkedIn.
Does anyone else have any questions? There are a few more minutes that you can skill her knowledge.
I'm happy to answer non-Kotlin questions as well, if you want. that should work. Why did you end up choosing to do mobile and Android versus iOS? So that's an interesting story. I started off with a research project when I was in undergrad in my last semester, and that was an Android project. And at the time, it felt affordable and easy to use. And then as I started growing in the Android space, nobody was giving me iOS opportunities because they were like, you know, too much Android and that's useful. So it kind of ended up that way. But also I really love the Android community. I think everyone's really strong knit. People are helpful with one another. And it's a really easy space to get into, you know, for everyone. And it's open source and I love that. Let me see. If you were teaching high school students computer science in 2020, which language would you choose to teach? I feel like that's a really good question. I think Kotlin is super easy to use and Python is still really, really good to use because I think it helps you focus on the fundamentals. I think one thing is that when you're a student, a lot of things don't get taught, like how to really have separation of concerns and clean code. Like it's there, but nobody's doing code reviews. So I would focus on things like that, how to use GitHub, how to use versioning, and choose an easy language to get started with, like Kotlin or Python. Have you noticed that more and more companies use Kotlin more than Java? I think it's a pretty even split. I think it also really depends on where you are. So more corporate companies will tend to prefer Java just because they have an established code base and it's just harder for them to move to Kotlin. Kotlin tends to be pushed more by the developers on the team than from like up top. So that's important. And it also is a location-based thing. I see a lot of people in like SF Bay Area use it more than other places, but yeah, that's what I've seen. How long did it take you to learn Kotlin? So it took an entire weekend to learn Kotlin basics, and then starting to apply it, I think over several months. And that's why I keep saying like code reviews are so important because it helps you grow. So you don't just stop in one place. So I would say like a few months to really get better at it, but I still learn every day what other cool things there are to do in Kotlin. Have you worked on Kotlin multi-platform project? I actually did not. I was kind of exposed to one and it was interesting, but I didn't actually work on it myself, sorry. I like extension functions very much and try to use it wherever I can, but some of my colleagues think that this is a bad practice. How do you think where to use it and where it's not? I'm curious why your colleagues think it's a bad practice. It might be based on how you're separating the functions. I really like having extension functions that are like string ext.kt or viewgroup.ext.kt. So you're saying like which class you're doing the extension on, and then those are all going into a folder structure, like a package named extensions, and that might help. I don't know. I'm curious why your colleagues think it's a bad practice.
We have to wrap up. We're on a little bit of a schedule to switch between events. There's not much time between them. I will make sure. Oh, sorry.
Yeah,
go ahead.
feel free to connect with me later. Yeah. Oh no, I was just saying, like, feel free to connect with me afterwards.
Yeah.
I see a lot of really
will post
good
your information and all the links that you send me to our Slack channel. I've seen several of you go ahead and join, so we will make sure to get all of the great information